Vegeta's sacrifice is a scene adored by many and disliked by few. With its heartwarming, tender moments, its beautiful artwork, and a climax as tragic as it looks, this scene acts as the moment Vegeta's character arc reached a point where he was considered an out-and-out good guy. But this iconic scene has had many different iterations over the last 25 years, and today I will be focusing and reviewing 4 of them. Going in order of release, I will first take a look at the original manga chapter from 1994, the original Japanese broadcast from that same year, followed by the Funimation edit and dub from the early 2000s, capping it all off with Dragon Ball Kai from 2014 to round out our 4 options. But the interesting thing about this video is that I won't be the one making the final decision at the end. You will. Once each of these versions has been reviewed and broken down, I will, at the end of this video, offer you, the viewer, a chance to vote in a poll for your favorite telling of this epic scene. So with that out of the way, let's begin with the very first time this legendary scene hit the public eye. And to do that, we have to go all the way back to April 19th, 1994. Coming from chapter 467, or volume 39 of the manga, titled Farewell Proud Warrior, this was written and drawn entirely by Akira Toriyama in the mid-90s. The cover art for this chapter sees Vegeta smiling and wearing the armor he wore during the Saiyan Saga and early Namek Saga of Dragon Ball Z. Somewhat surprisingly, on the same cover there is also a Waka verse which reads, "As Ju appears, as Ju vanishes. Such is my life. Everything in this world is but a dream within a dream." This is actually a riff on the famous death poem of Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the great warlord who helped unify Japan in the 1500s. Special thanks to Kanzenshuu.com for that info, by the way. This particular chapter is exactly 12 pages long, beginning right after Trunks and Goten made the save for Vegeta during Majin Buu's beatdown of the Proud Warrior. So how does the chapter present the events? Well, let's take a look. The scene begins with Vegeta having told Trunks to take care of his mother, to which Trunks obviously protests. The artwork in this section is quite angular, however despite this, we see our very first glimpse at a genuinely compassionate looking Vegeta, hugging his son for the first time, followed by his immediate knockout by the prince, to ensure his safety. The second he renders Goten unconscious, Piccolo arrives on the scene and Majin Buu begins walking from the rubble singing to himself. However, before Piccolo takes the 2 kids far away per Vegeta's request, Vegeta has one last thing to ask of Piccolo. Will I be able to see Kakarot in Otherworld? Unfortunately for Vegeta, the news is not good, to which he simply replies, pity. What follows this brief interaction are some of the most iconic panels in Dragon Ball. Vegeta powers up to full, Piccolo acknowledges his sacrifice, and we are greeted with that famous original farewell panel and its quote, "Goodbye Bulma, Trunks, and Kakarot." Iconic last words that lets all of us know he really did care a great deal for these people. A flash of light, a screaming prince, and 2 people that truly understand the gravity of it all. Truly a beautiful scene. Next up, the original Japanese broadcast from 1994, specifically airing on August 24th, 1994. And yes, that's only 18 weeks after the manga's release of that very chapter. Titled For Those Whom He Loves, Vegeta Perishes. Toei Animation broadcasted the very first animated version everyone in Japan and many around the world would see. The first thing I noticed with this version of this scene was what they added to enrich what was to come. For instance, in the manga, once Goten unravels Vegeta from Majin Buu's constraints, Vegeta immediately gets to his feet, where in the anime, this happened.
この程度でパパが死ぬわけないだろう。でももう無理だよ、戦うのは。サイヤ人の王子があんなやつに負けるもんか。
This small addition to the scene works extremely well in painting a very clear picture of what Trunks thinks of his father for us, the audience watching. The scene where Piccolo kills Babidi is quite different also, but I would argue in a less elegant way. Within the manga, Piccolo arrives behind the evil wizard and after exchanging some barbs, swiftly slices him in half. And while all that still happens in this version, there is some added filler, such as this scene where Babidi defends himself using a barrier and a magical technique which Piccolo overcomes with relative ease. It's quite dramatic and works well for the scene, although if you look carefully, you will notice the producers of the show trying to get back in line with the manga once their filler portions are wrapped up. For instance, the filler portion brought this fight to the ground, but in the manga, Babidi never leaves the air. So what does Babidi do once his shields fail on the ground? Fly randomly into the air like an actor getting to his position on stage. It's a small nitpick, but it is something I noticed. There's also a hefty amount of dramatic pauses and cutaways to Goku and Gohan between what actually happens in the manga, which lasts for a solid minute and a half plus commercial break. Once we return to the scene in question, we get expanded dialogue between Goten, Trunks, and the Saiyan Prince, featuring cute character moments with tragic, ominous undertones. Thankfully, it does a great job expanding on the source material, before leading to Vegeta's hug with Trunks, which lingers alongside the gorgeous Kikuchi score, until...
元気でな、トランクス。え？
Piccolo arrives to collect the children and receive Vegeta's message as the pink monstrosity hums his way back into the fray. Again, expanding in sections just enough to give added weight to the occasion. Lines like, "I'm counting on you, Piccolo," add to the sense that this is a truly different Vegeta than what we are used to hearing. What follows this is pretty much one-to-one with the manga, from what's explained and even what's shot. However, when it comes to this scene's big finale, we get a gorgeous piece of unique animation by Toshiyuki Kano, and is one of the most breathtaking shots in this series to date. As Vegeta's screams echo in the background, Joji Yanami rounds out the scene with his famous monologue. A warrior vanishes in a distant, astonishing light. His name, Vegeta, the proud Saiyan Prince. There are some fantastic performances by Mayumi Tanaka as Krillin and Toshi Furukawa as Piccolo. However, I think we can all agree that Ryo Horikawa stole the show with his brilliant and touching performance, complemented by the timeless Shunsuke Kikuchi soundtrack for the series. Next up, Funimation's early English dub. Original release, November 13th, 2001. Before I get into this, I would like to point out that this episode was the last one folks in the West would get for this dub for almost a full year. No! So yeah, real nice cliffhanger. Titled Final Atonement, this would be the first version of this in the English language for American audiences. Something of note, there's a running gag in Dragon Ball that all the episode titles pretty much give away or spoil the twists of any given episode. And despite that being true for the manga's chapter and the original Japanese broadcast, this particular English version left it more ambiguous, let's say, than the others. Visually, this version of the scene is almost one-to-one with the Japanese broadcast too. However, a lot of the dialogue was altered from the original and manga's versions. For instance, much of Bobity's interaction with Piccolo has a few changes, like him threatening just a planet instead of the universe like in the original. Additionally, there's this subtle change.
Goku devoted his life to protecting the lives of others because of his selflessness.
This change depicts Goku as, again, this paragon of heroism and justice. I also thought it worth mentioning that there are many times this version chooses to speak over what would otherwise have been silence in the earlier versions, using characters whose mouths are not on screen at that given time. For instance,
Vegeta, I think I understand. And one day, so will Trunks.
On top of that, the narrator after the ad break during that extended look at Gohan and Goku I talked about earlier fills up the silence with more of a description of the events taking place. Another point of note is that this version's Vegeta is significantly less patient and soft, referring to Kakarot still as a clown. Fans of this particular dub adore its score created by one Bruce Faulkner. It's hard to argue that it doesn't create a very distinct atmosphere, one that's become synonymous with Dragon Ball Z for fans in the West. Musically, the biggest difference in tone this scene demonstrates is during the sacrifice itself, where Kikuchi opted to play this, Funimation decided to play this. In the voice actor department, stealing the show during this scene has to be a young Christopher Sabat, who is playing both the roles of Prince Vegeta and Piccolo. And spoilers, it won't be the last time we see him either. Next up, and our last option, comes Dragon Ball Z Kai. Original release, September 7th, 2014. Back on the bandwagon with spoilerific titles, this episode is called, for his beloved ones, The End of the Proud Warrior. What's interesting about this version is that extended look at where Goku and Gohan are in the previous versions has been moved to the start of this episode, which I would argue is less jarring. This particular episode actually has more information crammed into it too. Not just chapter 467 is included, it also contains some of the end of chapter 466, showing Vegeta's decimation at the hands of Majin Buu. But let's get back to where we were with the last two entries. Okay, fast forward, yeah, right about here. This particular version is available in a host of different languages. Through my experience, I have heard both the English and the Japanese versions, with this being the closest the English version of the show has come to the manga, if that is something that interests you. Along with that, the long pauses in the scenes are cut down considerably. Less often you will see characters taking dramatic pauses, though they are still included where necessary. With all of that said, despite certain amounts of dead air being removed and all of it sped up considerably, there's still additional non-manga footage used, such as this scene with Babidi and Piccolo. Something I thought this version could have done without was the eye catches for commercial breaks. They are so spoiler heavy throughout the series, and if you are someone who is trying to avoid spoilers, they will be quite annoying to avoid. The highlight of this iteration, specifically for the English dub, has to be Christopher Saba's excellent performance as a soft-spoken Vegeta longing to protect his family and to hug his son. Needless to say, Ryo Horikawa did a fantastic job for his Japanese performance also, capped off with a tragic speech from the Saiyan Prince followed by a gut-wrenching scream. On the music front, up until the end of the Cell Saga, a man by the name of Kenji Yamamoto scored the series. However, it later surfaced that he had plagiarized a portion of music used, and thus, when it was decided to continue the series into the Buu Saga, Norihito Sumitomo was tasked with producing the series soundtrack. Action-packed when it needed to be, and beautifully haunting in other moments, this soundtrack provided plenty of nostalgic beats with just enough innovation to feel modernized. Echoing in the final moments of the scene as the narrator delivered the final lines of the episode. In a brilliant burst of light, a great warrior meets his end, the Prince of all Saiyans. His name was Vegeta. And so, as I promised, now that I have broken down the original manga chapter from 1994, the original Japanese broadcast from the same year, the early Funimation dub from 2001, and the Dragon Ball Kai version from 2014, I would like to present you with the opportunity to cast your vote. Which iteration of the events outlined do you think presented it best? I'm genuinely excited to see what the results of this poll might be. And if this format is something you guys enjoy, let me know down below by leaving a like or dislike depending on what you think. Don't forget to leave me suggestions down below in the comment section, and I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for watching.